All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Calli Regish.
And I'm Alison Regish.
This is Disrupting Nature's Balance.
The harmful effects of invasive animals in America.
So what are invasive species? The textbook definition of invasive species is a non-native organism whose introduction will cause harm. Through Allie and I's research, we've expanded upon this definition. We now know that ecosystems rely heavily on a delicate balance between organisms, resources, and surrounding environmental conditions. However, invasive species are becoming increasingly more harmful to the natural systems across the globe. Like many issues, the human race is at the center of this one. Whether it be through transportation, climate change, trade, or environmental alteration, species will find a way to establish themselves in the places they do not belong. If no preventative measures are taken, these species will inevitably outcompete the native organisms for their means of life. These invasives can also spread disease, causing economic and public health concern. From free-roaming invasive cats to invasive insects, these species clearly demonstrate how environmental stability can be negatively impacted when invasives take over.
As we narrow down some of the impacts in which invasive species have within nature, there are some distinctive traits in which they use to stabilize their methods and their strategies in order to infiltrate an area. We often associate these creatures as not naturally born into these areas, but they begin by taking over an area, competing with the animals living there, and eventually kicking these animals out. So they're invasive to the environment and to the economy. Not only are they a threat to plants, animals, but to humans as well. They begin by spreading diseases and viruses in which we have to get vaccines for, but not before there are plenty of deaths. Not only that, but they cause us to lose billions of dollars through farming equipment and fishing equipment destruction. So, what makes them thrive? What makes them infiltrate these places and continue to stay there? Well, first of all, they have the ability to grow and to reproduce. They take these natural resources and they continue to build their populations up more and more. So much that this happens rapidly, in which their populations become bigger than the native ones. Not only that, but they can withstand environmental conditions, and whether they come from colder environments or warmer environments, they can adapt to these circumstances. Not only that, but they continue to adapt to these resources. So who's going to stop them? Because there's no predators in these areas who are native to, or there's no predators in these areas that are used to them coming into these areas. So if we're arrogant to the way that they use these tactics, then they're going to continue to harm these environments. And so this leads us to root causes, in which they have success in finding ways of transportation from one place to the next. There are many common pathways, and the first one being vehicle or water transportation. So this includes things like boats, cars, trailers, anything that's moving them from one place to the next. They do this through the process of biofouling. This includes them sticking their eggs or seeds onto surfaces. The next one being firewood. So unprotected firewood can become a risk to these areas for wood-burrowing insects, in which they get to most likely shipping wood pellets and transport from one region to the next. So in order to maintain this, we can use local firewood. Not only that, but there are sources of live bait. So I know a couple of my friends and family who go fishing, and whether they know it or not, live bait can be invasive to some waters and the fish living there. So this can be harmful to not only things on land, but to things in water as well. This leads us to ornamental plant trade, where industries are selling and producing large quantities of invasive species. And in order to maintain this, we can continue to buy native ones and avoid buying the invasive ones. This leads us to things like human practices, so pet ownership. Things that are natural-born hunters, like cats and dogs, feed on things like lizards, rodents, or birds. So it's important to not keep these things abandoned, or they're going to damage the environment. But most of all, I want you to look to your right and to your left, because the most common pathway is us. People can unconsciously pick up plant seeds or eggs and transport them from one region to the next. So it's important that if we're arrogant to the way that these species use these ways of transportation, then they're going to continue to harm the environment.
So Allie touched on some ways that invasive species are impacting the world around us. So I'm going to give a few examples. Disease spread is a huge one. It can occur between species, but it can also be the invasive species itself. In my research, I learned about white nose syndrome in native bats. White nose syndrome is actually is the invasive. It is a fungal disease that kills 99% of the bats at Regish by stopping their ability to fly and hunt prey. Another huge impact is food chain disruption. So during my research, I conducted an interview with USGS scientist Amy Regish, and we spoke, among other things, we spoke about zebra mussels. So zebra mussels are filter feeders, and they consume types of plankton in the water that they invade, and it chemically changes the water as well, making it more difficult for native species like lake trout to thrive. Using this example, we can see that when too many pieces of the food chain puzzle are removed, the picture can no longer be seen. One of the biggest issues and one of the biggest impacts from invasive species is biodiversity. By definition, biodiversity is the vast variety and variability of all life on Earth. But more simply, it is to have many species in one area. Here, I place a biodiversity map which shows most biodiversity in the Amazon rainforest area. This is also an area that is not heavily populated by humans. Therefore, there's a lower chance for the introduction of invasives. Using this information and knowing that invasive species cause imbalance in the food chain, we know that invasive species severely harm biodiversity of an ecosystem. For example, Asian jumping worms are spreading rapidly across the US. They consume nutrients out of the soil, killing off native plants that need those resources to survive. Here we can see the before and after of native jumping worms and how they destroy the flora of the forest. Therefore, there is not a biodiverse area in these forests. So what are some things we can do? There are a few types of control that I found during my research. The first one is mainly used by larger organizations. You can't really do it as much at home, and that's biological control. So biological control introduces a natural predator or ups the amount of a natural predator in the area to kill off the prey or the invasive. Chemical control, we see a lot of this in Hadley, which is using pesticides to kill off, or herbicides to kill off the weeds or invasive insects in the area, but it's less popular because of the effects on the surrounding ecosystem. Cultural control focuses less on the invasive species and focuses more on the people in the area, bringing people together to raise awareness about these things. Physical control and mechanical control are sort of the same thing, where you can do things like pulling weeds or removing insects, like Mrs. Regish does in her own backyard, pulling out the worms or weeds, feeding them to the birds, and other things like that.
So, ranging from free-roaming cats to multicolored Asian ladybugs, there are animals who have found infiltrated ways in which they can create harmful impacts to the environment. As humans, we create deep bonds with our pets, especially our cats. Whether they are fond of us or not, they have a place in our homes in which we cuddle, feed, and play with them. But who knew that the most cuddly, innocent animal could be the most infiltrated, invasive animal in America? Well, there's estimated around 100 million of them, killing 2.4 million birds and 6 million mammals per year. They often prey on birds, lizards, and rodents. In fact, as we continue looking at these stats, there's an expert opinion from the Invasive Species Program that says cats can be wonderful pets, but cats that roam outdoors function as invasive predators that kill wildlife and disrupt ecosystems. So, what can be done about this? Well, first of all, we can control cat practices in which that stop them from roaming and limit their parameters. This goes in hand with maintaining abandoned cat populations. Not only that, but we can stop outside feeding and trap neuter release programs. But most of all, and the one being worked on today, is organizations to help manage the roaming. So free-roaming cats are a prime example of these invasive species that are creating harmful impacts to the environment. but it's more likely to believe that cats can take on these invasive methods. But no one would think that a ladybug could do the job as well. Except these are not the lucky ladybugs that everybody thinks of. Instead, they're imposters that invade the natives' lives. And before I continue telling you about this, I want you to guess which is the multicolored Asian ladybug that I'm talking about. And don't tell me, and just keep it to yourself because I'm going to bring it back to this. So they were initially brought to North America and to Europe by the USDA, which is a government focused on farming and agriculture. They take on invasive tactics of feasting on native larvae, and they can actually impact humans as well, where they can bite and infiltrate their homes during the colder months. And so I hope that you have your guess locked in, because if you guess the left-hand side, then you'd be correct. And we can tell this by the reddish-orange body and the M-shaped feature on its head. But I don't want you to lose these distinctive traits, because you can be a part of the solutions as well. I want you to start by vacuuming or sealing the openings in your house. Because multicolored Asian ladybugs are invasive species, no matter how innocent they may seem. So the invasive tactics of competition and adaptations that invasive animals use to infiltrate areas are harmful and destructive to the biodiversity in an ecosystem. We often associate these creatures with the fact that they're not naturally born there, but find a home for themselves anyways, So this brings new issues to the table. As the production of endangered species skyrocket, the animals that we have learned to love and share homes with find themselves face to face with extinction. As we are the leading cause for the spread of these creatures, we can become conscious of the changes in order to protect ecosystems and lives. So we want to leave you with one final thought, is that in the perspective of the natives, would you like to see your home get overrun, experience the loss of your family and friends, or your resources dried out? Because we didn't think so.